Hey everybody, this is game 6 of Black Swan Theory. As I've shared, Black Swan Theory is we're looking at not just the successes, but the challenges and how people achieve their goals. And so for this episode 6, I've got my dear friend for many, many years, Briana Royster, who is currently, I'm going to make sure I get this right because it's a very long title, who is the assistant professor of history in the Department of Gender and Race Studies at the University of Alabama. So first, I just want to start off and say thank you, Briana, for taking time to join and be a part of my show.
Oh, of course. Like, thank you for asking me. I'm glad you thought of me.
Yes, ma'am. Definitely. So before I get started, I know a lot about your career, so I want to spot some things. And before we get there, I want to go back to, your high school years. And let's go back to your junior year in high school. And who would you say was like the coolest person you ever had in your math class? Let's start right there.
Do you know how long ago that was? I'm trying to think. Oh, junior year.
I
I,
was in your math class.
I kind of figured. I figured.
but seriously, I want to go back to high school and want to go to your career goals. So going back to high school, what was your career goals like getting ready to prepare for college?
Oh my goodness. I honestly don't know that I had concrete goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I was good in school, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had the grades, but I wasn't exactly sure of what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think going into probably junior year, senior year, I began to think about becoming a pharmacist. And I think around that time, my ACT, SAT scores came out, and I did very well in math and science.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a couple of teachers who told me to look at engineering. And so that's what I initially did.
Mm-hmm.
But in high school, I knew I was going to go to college again, right? I
Mm-hmm.
had the grades, I tested well. But I don't know if I concretely knew what I wanted to do, right? I think growing up, if you were to talk about like elementary school, middle school me, I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to be a teacher, but those things kind of fell off by the wayside
Mm-hmm.
by the time I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think if I'm talking about my own goals, I probably pharmacist
Mm-hmm.
was the closest I came to having one.
Okay.
Um, and then, yeah, with the testing scores and teachers encouraging me to look at engineering,
Okay.
it became a goal, but it was never anything that I truly thought about in high
Okay.
school.
So going back to, so you start in college and you're going for this particular, when did you start realizing like, hey, this might not be the direction that I want to go in?
Yeah, so college. So I came to the UA, and I majored in chemical engineering because of my testing scores.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a great group of people, but yeah, the actual work was not for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I truly began to realize that when I co-opted. So I worked as like co-op is basically the same thing as an internship, but
Mm-hmm.
we were paid. But I worked 2 semesters at a paper mill in Alabama as a chemical engineering student, and I just realized this like absolutely was not for me. And granted, like, every chemical engineer is not working in a paper mill, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't even know how to describe how awful I felt. Right? It is it is something that I think you feel deep down when you know something is just not for you.
Right.
And that is essentially what happened. And so I'm thankful to have had that real world experience, right, at the paper mill to realize like this ain't it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by that time, I knew that I really enjoyed and loved history. But to be honest, I just knew there was no money in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't a trigger that I was ready to pull yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And before we go any further, just for those, and for myself, when we say chemical engineering, what exactly is that degree focused on?
So for me, specifically with working at the paper mill, right? Basically what I did was I did a lot of calculations that basically checked water flow
Mm-hmm.
in the mill.
Mm-hmm.
I also looked at the composition of they call it pulp. the stuff that paper is made out of. I had to do calculations to kind of look at those compositions, make sure they were in the right categories. But if you're going to school for chemical engineering, you are taking a lot of engineering courses, you're taking a lot of math courses, and you are, of course, taking a lot of chemistry courses and some biology as well, right? I remember going into Kimmy and again, right, not having any real idea of what was going on and realizing that I think I had to take, I think I took through like calculus 3, right? And I was just thinking like, what? Like I had no idea, right, that math courses even went that high, right? Yeah. It was insane. Yeah.
Okay. So what was that moment when you decided, because in a few episodes we've talked about the pivot, like at what point did you decide like I want to pivot my career?
So that was actually some time later, right? So I actually ended up like leaving the UA and taking a break. Before I left, I knew I need to leave chemical engineering, and I did. And I actually don't even mind saying like those grades just were not there, right? And so I left chemical engineering, went to a major in microbiology, and ended up getting a job at the local hospital working as a microbiologist assistant. And I left school at that point. And I did that for some years. I think my time, so at one point I also worked as a pharmacy technician in the hospital too. And if you add all those years together, I think it was about 9 years of work, just mostly working, right? And so when I left school after not finishing the microbiology degree, but I was working at DCH and felt like it was okay money, but it was night shift. I worked 12 hours overnight, and it was just tough. And I worked again in the microbiology lab, which means that I basically worked with bacteria all the time, and it stank, right? It was just not good. And I think there was a moment where I just became really frustrated one night on night shift, where I had done my job, I did what I needed to do, and I basically got cussed out by a doctor overnight because his nurse didn't do what she needed to do and then claimed that I didn't do what I need to do, right? And so I showed him the proof that I did what I need to do on time, and he still proceeded to cuss me out. And I was just like, you know what, this ain't it either, right? And I think at that point, I felt comfortable enough. I was older, and I felt comfortable enough to say, there might not be much money in history, but it's actually what I love to do, and it's time for me to be happy, right? And so at that point, being a little older, I realized the value in happiness, and what that actually meant for the trajectory of my life versus just looking at a paycheck. And so that was the pivoting moment for me, right? Getting cussed out by a doctor about something that was, not my fault. And then you add in these long hours. It was just miserable, right? And so at that point, I decided to go back to school to finish my bachelor's degree in history.
That's awesome. And so at what point did you decide that you were going to move on from the University of Alabama?
Oh, okay. So I completed the bachelor's degree in 2012. Which I feel like a lot of people who went to high school would be surprised to know that, right? Like I took that gap. So then I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. At that point, I was still actually working the night shift job in micro at the hospital. And thankfully, I had 2 professors who felt like I was very talented in the field of history, and they encouraged me to get a master's degree in history. I did that, and then
let's pause for a second. Let's go back to 2 professors who kind of encouraged you. Because these are the things I think are really important. Like, how did they kind of seek you out, or was it like you going into tutoring? Like, how did that bond did they lead to give you that encouragement?
So I was in their courses as an undergraduate, like I was an older, undergraduate student, but I had taken classes with them. And there were 2 in particular, who are actually still at the UA, right? Doctors Jenny Shaw and Dr. Steve Bonker. And Jenny Shaw is a historian of the Caribbean. Steve Bunker is a historian of Latin America. And I say that because I now study like Black people in the US and the Caribbean and Latin America, right?
Okay.
So they were influential, but they just told me after taking classes with them, right, that maybe you should consider grad school. Have you thought about grad school? And the truth was, no, I had not. I had, I had no idea. And so they encouraged me to really look at thinking about the master's program, right? Because you have to remember that I still have, as great as I was in history, I still had those grades in my transcript from engineering, right?
Right.
And so they encouraged me to look at a master's program in history to kind of show PhD programs that I could do the work, right? Once I became a history undergraduate student, I turned into a straight A student. But that still wasn't enough to make my cumulative GPA look great, right? And so, yeah,
because of the lack of passion that you had in the chemical engineering, where you kind of shared about your grades. Okay, I got you. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I hated it, right? And it's funny because I would, I might get a D in a chemical engineering class, but I was also a straight A student for my physics classes, right? And so it just kind of depended on what I was interested in. It's kind of this, it was the kind of student I was, right? If I wasn't interested, I wasn't necessarily showing up, right?
Right.
Don't do that, right? Those of you who are in college right now, like show up and talk to your professors. And I even think if I had taken the time to talk to some of those engineering professors, most of them, right? Like it may have made a difference, right? If I talked a little bit about what I was going through and what was happening in my own life, it might have made a difference. So if you are watching and you are in college right now, I strongly encourage you to talk to your professors, right? I did not. And, I think still ended up great for me, but we do see a lot of students, particularly Black students, right, who just kind of check out and we never know what happened, and they're just lost to us in a particular way. I'm sorry, the original question.
Well, I want to stay there. I want to stay there. I mean, you went down that road because I do, because also, to those students, it's like you have to understand that if you're not on scholarship, you've got to pay that money back. And if you are on scholarship, and if you are not making those goals, you're going to be out. You're going to be out of there anyway, and you do not want to. I can't stress enough. You do not want to start behind the 8 ball because of finances that had to do with school. It's a struggle enough as it is.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. Right. So when we talked about high school, right, I was talking about my grades and stuff. Like I came to the UA on a full scholarship. And then when I left, I lost it. Right. And so I do have student loans because of poor decisions. Right. And so, yeah, you absolutely don't want to do that if you don't have to. Right.
Right.
And professors are more flexible, I think, than students think, right, than students give them credit for. And a lot of students just don't know, right? If you're a first gen student, how do you know that you can actually go into office hours and tell your professor, I am struggling with these things, right? Like what can we do to work something out, right? That kind of language is not necessarily on anyone's syllabus, right? And so, a lot of students don't even realize that they can just ask for help. And most professors are absolutely willing to work with students.
The resources are there.
Stay here, yeah. So many resources. I am learning about things as a professor now that I had no clue about, that was offered, and that actually were offered when I was here, and I just didn't know. So yeah, the UA, a lot of colleges, they have a lot of resources that can help students out in different ways, right? Whether it's studying, sometimes it is financially, right? Sometimes I think a lot of people think that students who are in college have money. They don't, right? So sometimes it may be like a food bank, right? A lot of colleges have food banks. Students can come in, right? No questions asked, right? And take what they need, right?
Wow.
And so, yeah, there's just a lot of resources. So just reach out.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just reach
back
out.
to New York.
So again, right? So I got into the master's program in history, got into the master's program in women's studies, which is actually in the department that I currently work in. And again, it took people recognizing talent that I didn't necessarily think I had, who encouraged me to apply to PhD programs, even after finishing the master's programs. And so that's what I did too. I mean, you still have the same two people in the history department, Dr. Shaw and Bonker, they were still there. But in the Department of Gender and Race Studies, at the time, there was Dr. McKnight, who is currently chair of the department. And then there were Doctors Jennifer Jones and Doctors Hillary Green, who were Black women historians. And they really took me under their wing. They made sure that I was reading what I needed to read, writing what I needed to write, and truly understanding the field, right? And getting a feel for actually what it was I wanted to study and how to develop that topic. And they just went through with me school by school, right? To think about programs that would really fit for me in a PhD program. And they actually believed in me when I was not believing in myself, right? I did not think that my writing or my interests were good enough for a PhD program. But yeah, obviously I was wrong. So I'm very thankful for them. Yeah.
And those people are so important. And I want to touch on that shortly. But I want to pin right there, like on the New York. And the thing I really wanted, because, you know, like I said, we had a chance to share a lot of each other's journey, is I want to share that, like, you just didn't go and apply for New York and that was your first choice. You know, like this wasn't when you kind of share like how that grind, like the tough part of actually getting a school to accept you, and you know what it took like to apply.
Yeah. So I actually applied 2 years in a row. So the first year I applied was when I finished up the history master's.
Okay.
And I applied, I think, to 3 schools. And I was waitlisted at one and rejected by the other 2. And to be honest, I was like, I'm out. Like, I am done. And a professor convinced me to explore the master's in women's studies because she thought that I would kind of find my footing a little bit more, right? And she was correct. And so at the end of the Master's for Women's Studies, right? Or technically, I guess midway through, right? So applications are due in like December. So midway through the Women's Studies Masters, I applied again. And I think I was feeling a little down, right? After that previous year, getting waitlisted and rejected. But again, right, those Professors McKnight, Jones, and Green, right? Again, like, they believed in me, right? But it is tough. So I think the second go round, I applied to, I think, 5, and I was waiting.
And how long does this application let's just say, like, about how long does that whole filling it out? Because I'm sure there's certain requirements and things you have to fill out for. It's months.
It is months, yeah, because you will need to submit a writing sample that's normally like 20 to 25 pages.
Yes.
And it needs to be polished, right? And so not just, so it might be, so for example, I used what's called a seminar paper. And it was a research paper that I worked on for an entire semester. And then after that semester, I continued to work on it and polish it so that it would be good enough, right, to send to, an NYU, right, which is where I ended up going. And so that in itself is a months-long process, having your writing sample together. And then I also you have to complete a statement of purpose, which is where you are talking about yourself and your journey and what you want to study, why you want to study it, and why you were choosing this particular school, right? And that can also take months.
I hate that shit. I applied to this school because I need to go to school. Like, and I've had to, in those experiences of, applying for jobs, and they're like, why do you want to work here? It's because I need a job. It doesn't matter. So being forced to have to be able to build that, because you have to create that custom for each one, each one that you apply for. So that's even just more time.
Right. Yeah. And so it is, right. And it needs to be tailored to be specific, right? Because sometimes for at least a history PhD program, you could send in materials and your work can be great. But if you don't necessarily fit in with the strengths of that department, they will still reject you. And so it's not saying that your work isn't great, but it's saying you're not a good fit for here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like that is what, you know, you have to take some time to, again, look at these schools, right? And see who is offering what are their strengths? Are there enough people to fill up your dissertation committee, which is 5 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So most places like for you to list at least 3 people in the department who you can work with. And so, but the statement of purpose is normally only 2 pages, which sounds, you know, quick and easy. Is 2 pages, single spaced, but you're trying to fit so much material into these 2 pages, and it doesn't always read well. So I think my statement of purpose probably went through maybe 8 different revisions, right? Which again
8.
took a couple of
Wow.
months. Yeah, 8 for those. Yeah, those 2 short single space pages. Yeah.
So how many times just through this, I don't mean to cut you off, but how many times through this do you think like, I'm done, like I'm tired, I don't know if this is worth it?
You know, I think during that that second go round, right, when I was in the women's studies program with all these, you know, fantastic Black women historians, at that point I was sold on it, right? So I wasn't necessarily sold on, could I get into an NYU, right? Could I get into a Yale? But I was sold on the fact that what I absolutely wanted to do was teach Black women's history to college students, right? And I knew that to do that, I needed a PhD. And so at that moment, like I was sold on getting the PhD. So I wasn't checking out with regards to thinking I am done in that particular way.
Right.
I was definitely checked out as thinking like, I'm tired, right?
Right.
I am tired, I'm worn out. Like, do I need to revise this again?
Right.
You know, like those kinds of things, right? And I think I had self-doubt about whether I would get into some of these top programs. But at that point, with that second go round, I never necessarily thought about not applying, right? I did not want to work, you know, as the microbiology assistant at the hospital for the rest of my life. Like I was done with that. So yeah, I don't think I ever thought about not applying at that point, or thought about pulling applications or not finishing applications at that point. I can say what I did was I pulled, like I pared down the schools that I wanted to apply to, right? So instead of a list of 15, you know, I applied to, I think 5. I think it was 5, maybe 6, I think 5, right? And so that cut down like some of the work, you know, that I had to do. But yeah, I was pretty committed at that point to like at least trying to see if I could get into a PhD program. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move into, you are a student at the at NYU. Okay,
right.
You're a student at NYU. Had you visited the campus before?
So when you are accepted, NYU has what's called a prospective student weekend, or it's a day now, but it was a weekend when I went. And so they bring you up to see the campus because they know basically the history department, the people they accept are the same people that some of these other top programs will accept. And so they want you to come in and see the campus and hopefully fall in love with the city, but fall in love with the department and like kind of get an idea of what your community could look like. And so, yes, I visited, and I'm smiling because they brought me up in February. And, you know, as an Alabama girl, like I had never been up there before. And I was freezing. Like I literally, it was so cold that I literally called the department on the first morning we were supposed to have activities to ask if things were still happening, right? Because, you know, we shut down when it's, you know,
right.
when it's
a half
10
an inch,
degrees, right?
yeah,
Like
half an inch of
we
snow.
done, yeah.
Right.
And it was so funny because the administrative assistant was like, what are you talking about? Yes, we still have it, you know, but I was freezing, right? And that's just how to say the city I was not in love with when I first visited.
Okay.
The weather, absolutely not.
Right.
But the people and the community is what led me to NYU.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this was an important part that I wanted to, because I will say that
was it an inspiration of helping motivate me, and me opening my eyes up and seeing someone that I knew being able to move. So let's talk about that for a minute, because as we shared even before we got on here, I think it's important that moving and experiencing other things gives you more empathy and understanding of people and culture in ways. What was that culture shift or difference, or what did you learn from that experience of becoming a part of New York for how many years?
6 technically. Like it took
Wow.
me 7 for the
Okay.
degree, but I moved
Okay.
back to Tuscaloosa a year early. But yeah.
Okay.
hmm
So what was that experience like?
It was amazing, right? So I still smile every time I talk about New
Mm-hmm.
York, but also like the history department. The people I met there were so great and freeing for me. Right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think, right, when you talk about like widening your lens, right, seeing
Mm-hmm.
other cultures, seeing other experiences, like that is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way I thought about things just opened up so much because
Mm-hmm.
of how much I was exposed to in New York, right?
Right.
You are exposed to different people from different backgrounds. You are exposed to different ideas and different ways of thinking. But I
Mm-hmm.
think also what New York did was that it opened up the idea for me that I could be whoever and whatever I wanted to be. So I found New York incredibly freeing in a particular way. I didn't feel like I was locked in any kind of a box or any kind of
Mm-hmm.
cage. There was no, this is how you are supposed to act, right? There's no, this
Mm-hmm.
is how you're supposed to dress. There's like
Mm-hmm.
none of that. Um, at least in the pockets of New York that I was a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just incredibly freeing for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I was up there around incredible people. I felt like I was able to be my full self, which I think also added to the way that I read, research, and write my own scholarship, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you kind of lift off I don't want to say the chains, but kind of the chains, right? When you kind of take yourself out of the box that either you placed yourself in or that you feel like society has put you in,
Mm-hmm.
then your whole world opens, right?
Yes.
Instead of just kind of like looking in this box and the things you see here, you're now able to see the rest of the world, right?
Yes.
In particular ways. And it's so important. It was so important for me and my growth
Mm-hmm.
and the way that I think about things. So yeah, like I don't know, like what specifics you might want, but yeah, New
Oh,
York was great.
n- no,
It was just amazing.
I think that was, really it is the importance. And I encourage anyone. I'm not saying leave wherever you from forever, but I
Yeah.
do encourage, like, more than a vacation. Like, if you, and you've lived in New York and I've lived in Texas. When you have that family member, that cousin, that best friend that moves away, and they
hmm
offer you a chance to come visit and come stay, they want you to. I've realized now, they want you to come experience,
Right.
the culture differences and see what life is like. And I honestly, I have my own side business now. If I lived in Tuscaloosa, I would not. I probably would have done something, but my mind was not opened up to different things and different possibilities, and
Right.
seeing some things, because me being here in Texas, I see money with Black people that I didn't see unless you were a doctor or a lawyer in Tuscaloosa. You know what I mean? Or
Right.
a drug dealer. Like, you could
Right.
just be I mean, there's just so much opportunity, and things. And this is no knock to hometown. This is no knock to anywhere,
Yeah.
but it's just extremely important of, getting out there. And as you said, broadening your lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I'm back, like I
Mm-hmm.
made the decision to come back to
Mm-hmm.
Tuscaloosa. And it's like truly in some ways because I really, really want to teach Black history to Southern Black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
In ways that I didn't get as an undergrad. But like going away is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Again, just the ways it opens up your mind, the ways it
Mm-hmm.
opens up your viewpoint, right? That you
Mm-hmm.
can see what is possible in other
Mm-hmm.
spaces, right? That you
Mm-hmm.
can, even if it's just like making connections and like
Mm-hmm.
networking in particular ways, I cannot stress enough the importance of that, particularly in my life. But I think for a lot of people, and if you choose to come back, right, come back, and that's great, but at least you've seen how things can like be in other spaces, right?
And even for any other reason, I can assure you, you go anywhere for long enough, your food, your taste buds are going to change. Like the same foods that you have where you're from is not going to be. I was telling someone the other day, here, I'm used to going in a gas station, being able to get some fried chicken. Here,
right,
there's tacos. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's just a big world. It's just a big
yeah.
world. So that's just one thing that I wanted to share. And moving on to where do we want to go from here? I did want to. What did I want to touch on? Going back to, I know in the profile questionnaire you shared and you just shared about seeing students light up. Can you share that first experience for you that made you fall in love with the class, with the history of it, and when you felt that impact with students that you work with now? Does that make sense?
Okay. So, oddly enough, my first experience wasn't even with a Black student. It was a white student who was taking one of my courses that I was teaching as a master's student. And this student and I, we like worked on his writing in for this particular history course. And he struggled all semester. And we had worked and worked and worked. Like he was a student who came to office hours, for example. And he just couldn't quite get it. But by the end of the semester, I think it was maybe his next to last paper, he got it. And he was so excited to finally have an A. And it was honestly a well-deserved A. Like I didn't give it to him because we'd been working together. Like it was an A paper. And when he received his paper back, he was so excited that he jumped up and he hugged me, right? For a second, he was like, oh, like, wait, like my fault, right? But I think that moment of kind of seeing and recognizing growth in a student was a very special moment for me. If we talk about kind of that first time that I thought about possible impact. I think the next moment for me was actually a Black woman student at NYU who took one of my courses. And honestly, she was already a stellar student, right? Like she didn't need my help in that way, but she talked to me and she cried because she had never had a course that talked about Black history and specific Black women's history as deeply as the course she was taking with me actually did, right? That she couldn't, and you have the reaction a lot where Black students will say, oh, like I didn't realize there was, this much history, right? When you are normally taught about Black history, it's either slavery or the civil rights movement, right? There's no real in between with the way it is taught a lot of times, right? Particularly like when I was growing up, right? But students tell me that they still have the same experiences. And so she just cried, right? Because she felt seen in a particular way. That was the second time that I like truly realized that the impact of teaching Black history, or more specifically Black women's history, to students, right? And I think right now I taught a grad course in the fall, and right now I'm teaching an undergraduate course. And I think with both of them, like my students just affirm me in particular ways when I think one kind of like we previously talked about, right? When they understand that Black people's history is more than slavery and more than the civil rights. There's so much to study, but even within that, right? Like there's so much that students don't get about slavery or about the civil rights movement, right? And so even if you just teach those things, there's so much more that you can talk about and understand, right? So, and let's get off subject a little bit, right? But we just finished kind of our civil rights and Black power movement unit in my Black Women in America, or African American Women's History course. And like their excitement, like they perk up because the civil rights movement is familiar to them. But once they realize the importance of Black women's labor in the civil rights movement, and they learn about all these people like in the Birmingham campaign, for example, right?
Mhm.
And they learn about these women and the work that they do, their minds are blown, right? And they get really excited. And it's just, honestly, it is just one of the best moments for me is just to see students light up in that way when they are learning about like their own history, right? And the importance of Black women. One of the things I like to do is actually take some time to talk about Black women in the rural South, right? And so that these students understand, it isn't just, activism happening like in Birmingham, for example, right? I like to ask where are they from, right? And pick some of their like hometowns, right? To actually talk about, well, this is what was going on. At the same time, people were marching in Birmingham, right? Like rural Black folks were, like
It was
coming
happening
in some
everywhere.
areas, right? Yeah, it's just great, right? And so whether the graduate course in the fall or my undergraduate course this spring, having students so excited about Black history and the work that Black people have done, and to also see that Black history isn't just always sadness and trauma, right? Like there's also joy and resistance in Black history. And students love that, right? And so they'll, come and talk in the office hours. They'll want to continue discussion after class. They will talk. They might not necessarily be a history or an African American studies major, but they'll want to talk about how to incorporate some of what we are studying with what their degree might actually be, right?
Right.
So being able to see how history and the way that I teach history can help students in other parts of their life, but also that feeling, going back to that previous student, these students just feeling seen in a particular way, right? And it's, it absolutely helps in my own courses, right? If they feel that engaged with the course, but I think it also helps with the rest of their career at the university, right?
Right.
They feel seen in particular courses and it keeps them engaged. And I like to think that they're a little less likely to drop out, right? And when they're engaged, the grades are better. If they see how certain things relate to them, again, right, they begin to find and form community around like-minded people. They begin to take more courses in our department, for example. So I think like all of those things like really excite me about teaching these students, and they are moments that I look at and realize, like the work I am doing is actually important.
When you said shared that some of the history changes, I might have getting it wrong, but you said their lives, or like, what did you mean? Like some of the things that they learned. What can you give me an example of that?
I think it is important, especially because we just talked about the civil rights and Black Power movement. And so sometimes what I will get is students who realize that students just like them, right, made such a difference in the 50s and 60s,
That's
right?
dope.
And so they may not necessarily be thinking to go march and protest on the streets, right? But they do begin to think about ways that even if like very small ways that they can like change something that they are not
Right.
happy with, right?
Right.
Or they begin to actually think about how to share this knowledge with someone else in their life, right?
Right.
Um, and so, they may tell a friend, like, I learned this particular thing, right? Or I actually think one of the things that I really like to hear is I will go over a certain topic, and then students will leave my class and they'll call their mom, or they'll call their grandma, or they'll call their great aunt and say, like, did you know this, right? And because we're talking civil rights movement, and we're mostly talking like local organized movements, those students' grandparents and great aunts will say, yes, well, let me actually tell you about this other thing, right? And so it also becomes a way to bridge generations, right? That
Right.
you see students talking more to their elders and their families, right? And learning more about their own family, about whether it's activism or just everyday lived life of
Right.
Black folks in their families, also becomes another way that I can see changes occurring in their life. But even just speaking to academics, right, there are students who take my classes who are in the hard sciences and want to become doctors, for example, right? And so there's a way that we can connect like present day Black maternal health to like obstetrics and enslavement, right? And we kind of talk about that in class. And students who want to go to med school or want to go into other professional programs. I'm trying not to get too specific so I don't give my students away. But, you know, like they talk about the way that they can use some of this history, right? When they think about how they are then going to treat patients, right? In particular ways. And so there, you know, just lots of connections in lots of different ways, but yeah.
That's awesome. Let's, as we get ready to, I want to take up all your time, and I want to touch on like I think I got like 3 more questions for you. When was the moment? So you graduate from the NYU, you find a career at your alma mater. What was the moment that it all came together that you just felt like you've accomplished it?
Like, honestly, I don't know if I even feel that now, right? So I am someone, like I can be very hard on myself, right? And so I'll do things and think, well, I'm just supposed to do this, right? And so I don't always take the time to celebrate and acknowledge that I've done these things in the way that I need to. But what I will say is one of the moments when I think I felt most proud was actually before I graduated and so I graduated in May 2022. And in December, I knew I had the job at the UA. And my grandmother, who has passed, she was still alive in December of 2021. Sorry, December 2021, she was still alive. And I was able to tell her that the UA offered me a job and that I was going to like take this job as a professor at the UA. And why that was so important for me is that my grandmother actually used to clean the buildings here at the UA, right? And so coming, you know, for her living that life and hearing her stories about what it was like being a housekeeper or a custodian at the UA, and to have her be so proud of me to now be a professor, right, in some of these same buildings. Like that was probably my proudest moment, being able to tell her that and hearing how proud she was.
Right.
So,
I totally understand that. Going back to 2000, what would you tell 17, 18-year-old Briana? What advice would you give her of your life experiences? What would one piece of advice that you, if you can go back to 17, 18-year-old you, what would that be?
I think 2 things, right? One, I would say that you are enough, right? Because there were so many moments. I think I could have gotten to this moment faster, right? If I had believed in myself a little more. So I would tell 17-year-old Briana that you are enough. And I would also tell her to like trust her gut, right? I think there were a lot of instances where, I mean, even if we just think about history, or like I always knew I loved history, but again, right, just thinking there's no money in it, you know, like put me behind, you know, 10 years or so, right? So yeah, I think I would tell her to trust your gut and that, you know, she is enough and to just believe in herself a little more. And I think you didn't ask, but I would say
Please.
to other students, right, who might be struggling a little bit now, is that I would say it's okay, right? That it is okay. Struggling now or failure right now does not mean failure for your future, right? Just keep trying, find what it is that you love, and keep trying. Yeah.
Yes. You know, I don't think there's anything there's 2 things that I feel like I've learned, that everything is possible. You know, like you can achieve any goal that you want to. And the other one too is that if you follow your passion, like everything else will work itself out. The money is going to work itself out. Like everything that you want,
Right.
you know, it's there because if you're passionate about it, you're gonna be so much more intentional, and things are just gonna come much easier. Hey, and you might not make 6 or 7 figures, but I can assure you that when you go home and lay down, when you go home and lay down at night, it's a much more peaceful sleep when you can when you can do something that you enjoy.
Absolutely, yeah. There is, like, for real, I know it sounds cliche, but there's no price tag on happiness,
No, 100%.
Yeah, like happiness and peace, and joy, like, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One last thing, and I meant to ask this earlier, and it's a question I try to ask everybody because I think it's extremely important, especially with you being a professor, and you can hit this from any angle that you want to. Would you share your feelings about relationships?
What kind of relationship?
I mean, even for student relationships, even regardless of with the professors or students, relationships one another, but the importance of relationships just in that realm.
Yeah, so I think a key to honestly any kind of like good relationship is clear and solid communication, right? And so I think about that particularly when I'm thinking about students, right? Interactions with students, speaking to students, like clear communication truly helps out. But also, I also think about like networking, right? Again, clear communication. But I also think, so I'm thinking like how to put this right. Specifically, if you are talking or thinking about connections, networking, relationships, and building a future for yourself. Essentially is to be kind when it's warranted, right? You don't know who you are going to meet and who you are going to need and who will be useful to you later in life. So be kind, again, when it's warranted, right? Because some folks, look, you may need to edit it out, but some people got to learn sometimes, you know what I'm saying? But when it's warranted, like absolutely be kind, when you can. It truly goes a long, long way. Like people will remember kindness, which again, I think, sounds cliche, but people will absolutely remember kindness. Right now, you also have to be good at what you do,
right.
But yeah.
Yeah, but that kindness will take you a while now. It will take you a while.
Will. Yeah.
So we are about to wrap up. Is there anything that you would like to close out with? Any moments? Anything that you would like to share?
I can't think of much other than if you have family members, friends, students who are currently attending the University of Alabama. Like I am here. They do not need to be African American studies majors or minors or women's studies minors, which is what we hold in the department. I just like talking to students generally, right? That is part of why I took this job, because I wanted to be able to reach out to a particular demographic. Like I feel fulfilled in that. So, you can send your students, to me. They can send me an email. And so I highly encourage that. I'm also teaching undergraduates and graduate students in the fall. So look me up and, but again, I think just find what you love, right? Find what you love, find what you are passionate about, and find the people who are going to support you in those dreams, and just keep thriving,
That's awesome. Thank you for that. I'm just gonna end the recording, Bree, but just hold on for a second. Black Swan Theory. Thank you all. We're out.